Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, April 26, 2017. Just making sure we're not doing a pre-recorded podcast, unless this is the future when you're listening to this, in which case you're either just catching up or this is, in fact, next year's podcast when I predict I'll be off on April 26, 2018. I don't really know why. I've got no particular reason to think that's the case, but it feels nice. It sounds like it might be fun. Anything you'd like to do next year? Let's catch up on a couple of fun and interesting topics today. First of all, we'll have Greg Dworkin joining us in a few minutes to help wrap up on our headlines, and there are a lot of them today. Second of all, it occurs to me last night, actually, as I was putting together the morning post for today's show, and thinking, oh, great, well, it's Wednesday, and that means I'll have lots of help. I'll have Greg Dworkin with us. I'll have Joan McCarter with us. It's Wednesday. It's a regular thing. I flashed back to the end of the close of the show last Wednesday, and I heard in my head Joan's voice saying something about Friday, and now I can't remember what it was. And, loyal listeners who take notes on the show can tell me perhaps. Now I have to go and find out, and I have to send her a note and say, did you say you were coming on Friday and not Wednesday? I'm not certain. Anyway, we got plenty to talk about one way or another. I got a note here from Armando that says he'd like to talk about the Sanctuary Cities case. I think we can fit it in. If we do this right, I don't have to do any of the show. So this could really work out very well. You know, there's usually a good couple of, between 10 to 20 minutes or so in between Greg and Joan. Oh, and I have my answer now. Okay, I didn't imagine the whole thing. Okay, all right, so it's going to be fine. Everything's going to go just as normal. Joan, every time she hears me in a panic about, where's Joan? She feels, okay. It's all fine. It's all good. She was actually thinking of possibly calling in last Friday. That's what it sounded like to me. And I thought, okay, well, that's maybe I'll just sort of pencil it in. If she calls, she calls. It's great. We do it loose on this show, so why not? And then I started to worry that she meant not going to do next Monday. But she is. She'll be here, and everything will be fine. Armando, we can probably fit you in. If you want, you can call in and tell Greg he's wrong about the first half of the show, and then segue into being wrong for the second half of the show. And then I guess Joan can call and tell us why you're wrong about that. Although on the Sanctuary Cities subject, I doubt very much whether that will be the case. All right, we are live. Daily Coast Radio is live now, and as you know, each day, Bill starts us off with his morning tweet from out of Portland, Maine. Crazy-ass Portland, Maine. We're ready to go. Trump tax reform unveiling day today, Wednesday. That's now. And Kagro X, that's me, is super meh about it. Well, I'm not. Although I'm thinking of becoming a millionaire. I'm going to try and get that done before this afternoon so I can have an opinion on this tax plan. In the meantime, we'll round up the opinion of public intellectuals and also people who are paid to write for newspapers. Greg Dworkin is here because he reads newspapers. Good morning, Greg.
Hey, good morning. How are you?
I'm super meh.
Just
How are
meh,
you?
huh?
Well,
listen, Portland, Maine is actually a fantastic city.
It is.
Love going there. Love the food, especially in the old seaport. And it's just well worth your time if you're in the area. Stop by and don't just drive through.
It's also crazy.
Well, but Bill's there.
Yes.
That's the best part.
Right. Crazy. Like I told you. All right. Well, so this morning we are going to have allegedly an unveiling of a tax plan, maybe also a healthcare plan, also possibly a war.
Let's start by looking at the big picture.
All right.
Washington Post article here kind of summarizes it with the headline,
picture.
Which is that Trump scrambles to show progress as the 100-day mark approaches. That's what all of this is about. And it has a picture in this article of him holding up one of his executive orders that he signs. But really it looks exactly like the template for Trump draws, if you've ever seen that Twitter
he does the same thing
feed. He has a picture of Mickey Mouse. But this particular Washington Post piece didn't do that. Anyway, Trump scrambles to show progress as the 100-day mark approaches. And what sort of things does he want to show progress in?
I don't know.
As an aside, it looks like, and I don't have that in front of me, but I saw a historian on Twitter pointing out that the Trump White House put out a press release saying that FDR had only done 9 executive orders and Trump had done something or other.
Yes.
Actually, FDR had done 99.
Oh.
And they only listed in one of the American presidency projects the 9 most important and relevant, but they're numbered. And if you number them, and you'll find that some of them weren't all that important, but nonetheless, FDR did quite a number, maybe 10 times more than Trump did. So Trump is trying to catch up. And here are the headlines. This is from Robert Costa and Paige Winfield Cunningham. House Freedom Caucus leaders back new health care plan. Basically, what they've done is they've gotten the conservatives to agree to junk pre-existing conditions by a backdoor route, which is to say, yeah, you can keep them, but, insurance companies can charge as much as they want for them, state by state. And what's going on here, really? They can't pass anything. It's not even clear that they can pass this. Maybe they can. But the strategy with the Republican House is to continue the con game as long as they possibly can on repeal and replace. What they want to do is pass anything, no matter how bad it is, and then say, okay, we're sending it over to the Senate. They're going to get rid of it and not pass it. And it's the Senate's fault. It's not our fault. Even in 2017, it turns out that Democrats are the opponents, but the Senate is the enemy. And so if we can just blame everything on the Senate, we're good. Nobody will notice and nobody will care. Which, by the way, is probably true for their own base, but it's not true for everybody else, as Obamacare is more popular than ever at this particular point in time. And one of the really interesting things about all of this, piece from Vox, Republicans exempt their own insurance from their latest health care proposal. This is a good one.
Nice.
Republican legislators want to keep popular Obamacare provisions for themselves and their staff while getting rid of it for the rest of the country. I mean, this is going to go over really well in 2018.
Remember when that was a punishment? That was supposed to be their measure of sincerity in passing the thing. It was something they were imposing on Democrats. If you want to pass this, you live under it. Okay, we will. And now they can't let go.
Right. It's so weird, under Obama, the difference between the Congress and the public is the Congress was forced to take their own medicine. And under Trump, it's more Trump style, do as I say, not as I do. House Republicans appear to have included a provision that exempts members of Congress and their staff from their latest health care plan. The new Republican amendment, introduced Tuesday night, would allow states to waive out of Obamacare's ban on pre-existing conditions. This means insurance could once again, under certain circumstances, charge sick people higher premiums than healthy people. And when they say under certain circumstances, they'll find a way.
Yes.
Republican legislators like this policy well enough to offer it in a new amendment. However, they don't seem to like it enough to apply it to themselves and their staff. A spokesperson for Representative Tom MacArthur, who is, by the way, one of the co-leaders of the Tuesday group, the moderates, who authored this amendment, confirmed this was the case. Members of Congress and their staff would get the guarantee of keeping those Obamacare regulations. Health law expert Tim Joss flagged this to Sarah Cliff, who's writing this, and then goes into the background about all this means. So it's hard to spot, but it says there's a specified non-application provision. Okay. In no case may a waiver for purposes of paragraph 1 apply with respect to any of the following provisions. Section 1301 of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, to the extent that such section applies, the qualified health plans offered through the co-op program under Section 1322 of such act, or multi-state plans under Section 1334 of such act. Is that clear?
Yes.
Yeah. So they hide it.
Yeah, it lays it out beautifully. I mean, it's all the information is there. You just have to read those sections.
Yeah.
And, people have time for that.
Sure. So it's all good. So Andy Slavitt, who was incredibly helpful in actually getting the whole thing passed in the first place, which is to say the Affordable Care Act, as a quick summary. The Trump Care Amendment is out as anticipated. It allows states to get rid of essential benefits and community rating. This amendment is on top of Trump Care's 20% premium increase, 24 millions losing coverage, 17% popularity, gutting and capping Medicaid, and what's getting charged more for a pre-existing condition mean? It means no access. So it might be the difference in, 3,500% markup for certain conditions.
Sounds good.
And he's got a little chart showing how that's true. Plus, he lists all the pre-existing conditions and essential benefit charges on top of all of that. So that means, in Andy Slavitt's view, caving into the extreme wing of the party so White House can claim a victory during those first 100 days. And
yes,
if it actually passed, which I don't think it will get out of the Senate, Ryan can cut Medicaid to pay for major tax cuts.
Excellent.
So that's what we're going to have to keep an eye on. And that's on top of the other things. There's an interesting piece here by Dana Milbank saying apparently repealing Obamacare could violate international law.
I did see that. And then I saw it was Dana Milbank. But I thought it was interesting anyway.
The UN has contacted the Trump administration as part of an investigation into whether repealing the Affordable Care Act without adequate substitute for the millions who would lose health coverage be a violation of international conventions that bind the U.S. It turns out that the notion that health care is a right is more than just a Democratic talking point. A confidential 5-page urgent appeal from the Office of the UN High Commissioner on Human Rights in Geneva sent to the Trump administration cautions that the repeal of the Affordable Care Act could put the United States at odds with its international obligations. February 2nd memo, which I obtained Tuesday, was sent to the State Department and expressed a serious concern about the prospective loss of health coverage for almost 30 million people, which could violate the right to Social Security of the people in the United States. Now, obviously, this doesn't have any meaning because the Trump administration will do what they want, and his base will love it because they're thumbing their nose at the UN. But it just gives you an idea of how the rest of the world winds up looking at the U.S. and how our standing in the world just continues to erode under Trump.
Yes. Is that why he wanted to threaten to fire Nikki Haley?
I don't know. Did he?
He did some sort of random thing. I guess they had, I don't know whether it was all the cabinet members. There was a whole assembly going on, as you know, a big photo op happening at the White House. Nikki Haley was there. And Trump started jokingly asking around the room, does everybody like Nikki? Because if not, we can easily replace her. What do you think? Thumbs up, thumbs down? I don't know what prompted it. I'm sure he just thought, that's just me goofing around with my staff.
To be king.
Yeah, right. And it's just, the woman comes around, oh, okay, well, let's joke about firing her, because she's easy to replace, because all women are. Who knows? In 10 years, I may be dating her children. Who knows?
Yeah.
I don't know. Does she have any kids?
I don't know.
I don't know either. Okay, who cares? Hey, why wait?
Well,
what is that controversial to say? How old are the kids? I don't know.
That may not even be the weirdest thing.
Probably not.
Right?
I'm going to look up and see
something even weirder
kids.
Than that.
Sure.
I will send this to you because this actually happened. Remember, Bill O'Reilly's gone, and Roger Ailes had this sexual a culture that he's was fired over.
Yes.
And a lot of these guys are replaced.
Right.
So this is Fox News, and it's Jesse Waters.
Oh, yeah.
On Fox News
Bill
regarding
O'Reilly's
Ivanka
guy.
Trump. And how did she do in Germany? She got jeered at a women's panel while defending her father, and one of the very astute questioners in Germany asked her, who are you here representing? Are you representing your business? Are you representing the people or the White House?
Also a good question. Yes.
Got a microphone in her hand. Okay.
Yeah.
And let me quote. Jesse Waters says, I really like how she's speaking into that microphone.
Because a lot of people at that forum did do that.
Yes. And a lot of the women reporters were tweeting this around saying, where's the culture change?
Yeah. Well, there is none. Of course, he came up. He's Bill O'Reilly's guy. So it's no surprise. And of course, everyone remembers he was a professional stalker. That was his job for O'Reilly.
Yeah, for example, I got this one from Maggie Haberman at New York Times, who tweeted this thing and said, heck of a culture change.
Yeah. Good job. Well, I mean, it's part of the indoctrination at Fox. And I mean, the more you sexually harass your coworkers or anybody at random, the more un-PC you are. You see, you're shaking things up, you're challenging,
Yeah, that'll just, it'll prove everything. Actually, it's politics. I think the lawyers are going to have a field day with that. Well, good. He's pretty disgusting. Well, the Bill O'Reilly wannabes and the Roger Ailes wannabes, it's hard for them to keep themselves back. Anyway, next story. Trump had proposed large increase in deductions Americans can claim on their taxes, and he wants to decrease the corporate tax rate from 35 to 15, lowering the tax rate for millions of small businesses that now file their tax returns under the individual tax code.
Yeah.
He wants to basically lower a lot of the revenue that's coming into the Fed, so a lot of the conservatives really like this.
Great.
And Ben Castleman over at 538 has a helpful piece here. The 3 questions that will decide if Trump's tax plan works. Number 1.
All right.
What counts as a business? In theory, individuals pay taxes at the individual rate and business pay the corporate rate. But actually, currently, most businesses don't pay the corporate rate. That's because most businesses aren't actually set up as corporations. They're limited liability companies or partnerships or other entities that pass their profits straight to the owners, where the income is taxed at individual rates. Otherwise known as a loophole, right?
Yeah.
So right now, this distinction doesn't matter that much because the gap between the corporate and the individual tax rates is small. But if you raise them, then it gets to be a big deal. So that's question number 1.
Right. You become a corporation.
And question number 2, because corporations are people too. I think that's what Romney meant.
Right.
If you can find corporations to be able to pay at the individual rate, it's much cheaper for them, and I think that's what Romney had in mind. So question number 2, what counts as income? The central idea of most proposals to reform the corporate tax is if more income is taxable, because there are fewer loopholes, you can tax it at a lower rate, or in tax jargon, lower the rate, broaden the base.
All right.
The trick is deciding which loopholes to get rid of. Every deduction and credit in the tax code is a built-in base of supporters who will argue that their loophole is good economic policy.
Yes.
So gives an example. Right now, businesses can deduct interest expenses on their income taxes. Many economists view that as bad, in part because it encourages companies to borrow money instead of selling shares. But the provision has staunch defenders, notably the real estate industry, which routinely relies on debt to fund development and acquisitions and to improve financial returns. Trump's own real estate business has at times taken on substantial debt. If that and other deductions stay in place, cutting the tax rate will be much more expensive. So that leads to the whole issue of how are you going to pass this and justify it to the American people and to Democrats and to independents, because Republicans will buy anything that they're selling right now. If you don't see Trump's taxes and you don't know how it affects his individual personal income, because he's setting it up to do well by the real estate industry. And by the way, that's where he gets a lot of his money from.
Yes, that's true.
Number 3, what about the deficit?
Oh,
abandoning budget neutrality poses another problem for Trump. Senate rules effectively mean Republicans will need some Democratic votes in order to pass a bill that increases the deficit over the long term. As a result, any tax cuts that aren't paid for will have to be temporary. That's a significant disadvantage for corporate tax reform, in particular because businesses plan years in advance and want to know what the tax system will look like in the future. So he's got those issues. And those simple 3 questions are among the things that make it very difficult to actually pass anything because they all have to be answered. And the way the Trump White House likes to do it is just do anything and say it's a win.
Yeah. That makes it easy.
Yeah, except that often you can't because it requires Democratic votes and they'll say no.
Oh, well, then it's a win because we faced historic obstruction by Democrats.
No, I said wind. It's at our back. I never said win.
Oh, yeah. Right, that's true. I thought you meant Tony Gwynn.
We have momentum here. That's what I meant.
Okay.
When I said wall, I meant drones.
Yes, I liked it. People. Now it could be blimps.
What's so difficult to understand about that? You guys are so stupid.
Yeah, it's a metaphor for blimp.
Exactly. It's a metaphor.
Which is why I'm eating this blimp.
You know who said it's a metaphor? Lindsey Graham said it's a metaphor.
That's true. He did.
You know why he was able to say it's a metaphor? He's a senator. And senators don't do anything. They spend all their time defending Trump because they don't have anything else to do.
Well, there's no legislation to work on.
Yeah. So they got to find something else to do with their time. And Lindsey Graham found a hobby. I'm a Republican. I'm going to defend Trump.
Okay.
The idea that the wall is a metaphor is dumb and not supported by the evidence. And no, his base isn't going to revolt over it yet. But eventually, things will change. And actually, before we even get to the sanctuary cities one, and I do hope Armando comes in and explains that better, there's a recent poll from CBS News, April 21 through 24. Do you approve or disapprove of the way Donald Trump is handling his job as president? And this is, pretty clear around all the polls. Approve is 41, disapprove is 53. Approval of 41 is record low for a president. Everybody is aware of this by this point. that, everybody else was in the high 50s, low 60s, and Trump is in the 40s. How does he get there? Republicans approve 83, disapprove 14. I like that 14. That 14 is who we're talking to.
Okay.
Democrats approve 10 and disapprove 88. Actually, Democrats dislike him more than Republicans like him, which is notable, and that's why he's not at par. The other reason is the important number, which I haven't said yet, and I'm going to now. Independents, 38 approve and disapprove 52. So,
wow.
Yeah, he'll keep his base, but it's everybody else. It's always been about everybody else. Do you feel things in this country are generally going in the right direction, or do you feel things have gotten seriously on the wrong track? Right direction 36, wrong track 59. You can guess how Democrats and Republicans feel about it, but let me just point out that Indies at 36-56. And as in most of these numbers, you can look at the independents, see how they feel, and you're pretty much going to get the total. But even here, right track, wrong track, right direction 70, wrong track 27 for Republicans, right track 8, wrong track 89 for Democrats. What best describes your feelings about what Donald Trump is doing as president? Excited, optimistic, concerned, or scared?
Oh.
Okay. Concerned is 31 and scared 26.
Okay.
57. That's pretty good. Excited, only 12%. That's 30% of Republicans are excited about it, and 1% of Democrats.
All right. Well, okay. Excited.
And 9% of independents. Okay. Half of the Republicans are optimistic, but 19% of them are concerned or scared. There are a group of Republicans who are not so thrilled about what's going on here, and those are the people we'll have to keep an eye on. Has what you've seen in the first few months of the Trump administration made you feel more confident, less confident, or not change your level of confidence in Trump? That's tricky, because if you thought he was a dunderhead, incompetent fool, con man the way I do, no change.
True.
But more confident, 25, less confident, 36, no change, 38.
Still, I'm somehow less confident.
Yeah. Of Republicans, 10% are less confident. Of Democrats, 60% are less confident. And for the Indies, it's 23 more confident, 34 less, and 42 no change. So once again, the independents pretty much mimic what's going on with the rest of the country. And if you lose the independents, you lose elections. And then, as you may know, Donald Trump, last question, is coming up on 100 days. Do you think that's enough time? Most people say no. 37% say it's enough time, and 62% say you need more time.
I think that's plenty.
The number that the Indies have.
And that's enough for me. I'm finished.
Yeah. So, all of interest. It's just helpful to keep in mind as you're looking at all of this, and as his low approval ratings seem to get, quote, stuck, end quote, at 40, it's because the Republican base isn't moving yet, but it is low. And if it doesn't move, it also means it's not moving up. And if it doesn't move, it also means that Trump is not expanding that base, and I don't think he can.
Well, that would be terrific. Let's fast forward a couple of years.
Right. Last two stories, and hopefully, again, Amanda will do a better job on this one than I will. Sanctuary cities ruling when a judge quotes Sean Spicer, it's not a good sign for the White House.
Well, noted scholar.
Yeah.
So, okay.
When a long list of comments from President Trump, his surrogates, and his spokesperson shows up in a federal court ruling, it's fair to say it can only mean one thing. A constitutionally questionable executive order is about to get a judicial smackdown. That was true in March when federal judges in Hawaii and Maryland suspended Trump's travel ban, and it's true Tuesday when U.S. District Judge William Orrick of California temporarily froze Trump's executive order on sanctuary cities, ruling that a case could be made that it violated the Constitution. Remember, this is a district judge.
Yes.
And Trump and his cronies keep tweeting that Ninth Circuit, they did it again.
Yes. Well, the district, it's part of the Ninth Circuit, but yeah, I guess they love to point at that one, and they love to get their stats wrong too. But yes, a district judge, that's otherwise known as a federal judge, of course. Yeah. District court is the trial level federal.
All those federal judges, they're all named Curiel.
Plus Mexican.
I mean, they all look alike to me,
Mexican. Right? California.
They're federal judges. Mexican? They're all brothers and sisters.
Yes, and it's terrible. So sad that a single judge, which is usually how things are.
It's terrible, bigly. So the 49-page ruling, according to this story, focused largely on an all-too-familiar theme for the young administration, the consequences of bragging and bluster by Trump and top administration officials. Orrick homed in on the vast discrepancies between what government lawyers defending the sanctuary cities order argued in court and what administration officials said about it in public. And I mention that because I think it's going to be a continuous theme. As to the details of what the law says, I'll leave that for Armando.
Okay.
All right. And then my final piece here, which may be the most important piece of the day, by David Leonhardt from Upshot.
Okay.
And it's entitled The Urgency of Ethnic Nationalism. And points out that across the world, virulent nationalism tinged with bigotry is on the rise across much of the world. In the U.S., Donald Trump won the White House despite and because of, partly, his disdain for Mexicans, Muslims, and African Americans, and his flirtation with anti-Semitic tropes, which is why he denounced anti-Semitism yesterday in his speech at the Holocaust Museum. Most welcome.
For it.
But as long as Gorka and Bannon work for him in the White House, it's irrelevant what he says. It's more important to watch what he does. Back to David Leonhardt. In the face of this ethnic nationalism, citizens often face difficult choices. They have to decide how much of a priority to place on combating it. Should voters eschew their favorite candidate and vote for one with the best chance to defeat the nationalist? That's what people have to decide in France. You didn't get Fillon. You didn't get maybe Sarkozy. You wanted somebody else. You got Macron. I'm trying, guys. And
that's pretty good.
Macron, like mac and cheese.
Macro.
Macron. So you vote for him even though he's a neoliberal and he's a centrist and he's never held office before? Well, you do because you want to stop Le Pen.
Yeah.
I mean, that seems to be pretty straightforward to me. I would have voted against Trump almost no matter who the Democrats were running, and I think that that's the right thing to do given who he is and what he's done. But, he says, David Leonhardt says, should policy experts be willing to work in an administration that plays footsie with intolerance? Should a museum dedicated to fighting hate like the U.S. Holocaust Memorial host a hateful president? These choices often end up being more complicated than they first seem, and I don't want to suggest otherwise, but a disturbing pattern is still emerging. Too many people, well-meaning people on both the left and right, have grown complacent about nationalist bigotry. You know this, David. I complain about this all the time. People are normalizing Trump. This is what I mean by it. They are erring on the side of putting other priorities first, and ethnic nationalism is benefiting. Let's start on the political left, and though I'm not about to lapse into false equivalence, ethnic nationalism is largely a force on the right, but the left needs to decide how to respond, and it hasn't been effective enough so far. It has underestimated the threat and put smaller matters ahead of larger ones. After France's first round of voting, the leftist candidate Jean-Luc Mélenchon refused to endorse the last person who can prevent Le Pen from becoming president, Emmanuel Macron. A Le Pen presidency, to be clear, would likely tear Europe asunder, marginalize French citizens who hail from Africa and the Middle East, and lead to a big expansion of security forces. It would be the biggest victory for Europe's far right since World War II by far. Yet, Mélenchon still won't back Macron, a centrist former banker who was until recently a member of the Socialist Party. It's a classic case of political purism that may feel good but can do grave damage. And just look at the United States. Presidential vote totals show Trump's margins in Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, which together would have swung the result, were smaller than the tally of Jill Stein. It is impossible to know whether Stein's campaign cost Hillary the election, yet it hurt, clearly, in a close race. Parts of the American left aided Trump. I understand this point enrages backers of Stein and Mélenchon. They have real differences of opinion with center-left candidates, and they want to win those debates. But the final round of an election that includes a viable white nationalist isn't the time to hash out the future of progressive politics. It's a time to defeat racism. And then a version of this dilemma applies to the center. Apolitical institutions have to decide what to do. Of course, that's why we had the March on Science last weekend. And the Holocaust Museum itself is in a tricky spot. Maybe the museum's leaders are confident Trump will use the speech as a turning point, which would be wonderful. It was a decent enough speech. But by conferring the museum's prestige on Trump, these leaders have a new responsibility to call out future dog whistles from the administration. The Holocaust Museum has effectively invested in Trump. And then there's the political right. Most Republicans despise the notion that their ideology makes room for bigotry. Theirs is the party of Lincoln. Fair enough. but that history brings responsibilities.
Most
Today's
people don't know
Republican
that.
Party has made room for Steve King, Steve Bannon, Jeff Sessions, and Fox News, not to mention the president. If the Holocaust Museum is invested in Trump, Republicans are really invested in him and his fellow nationalists. You don't get to call yourself the party of Lincoln and stay silent when voting rights are abridged, hate crimes are met with silence, and dark-skinned citizens are cast as un-American. I never expected to live through a time when bigotry would again be his ascendant, but we're living in that time, and it brings a new set of choices. He's absolutely right. I think it's a hugely important article, and this is why I resent terribly institutions like the New York Times, the Washington Post, or cable TV, or anybody who just idiotically will look at his speech at the Holocaust Museum and, play it as if it's the long-awaited pivot we've all been waiting for. He finally had a strong denunciation of anti-Semitism. Who frickin' cares? He's got Bannon and he's got Gorka in the White House. Until those guys are fired, shut up about it.
I guess there's that. I don't know how the museum itself denies Trump access. I don't know if it can. I mean, although they could certainly make a big stink about it.
Institutions are in a
Everyone would
completely
say,
different
"Oh my God."
position than individuals.
This is true. Although, it certainly could have been the case that it simply could have been covered as, well, President Trump said the things that you have to say when you go to a Holocaust museum on Holocaust Remembrance Day, but
Is that the other time that he forgot to mention Jews?
Yeah, that's true. But it was written by a very Jewy person, so it was okay, apparently. So I don't really know what... Yeah, I will say this, so I'm a little bit confused. I'm baffled because Armando says, hey, this is a very good piece. So I don't know what to do now.
Which one?
The one you just read. You liked it, he liked it.
Wrong there.
I think the show must be over.
Yeah, I think it's a great piece. I really like David Linhart. It's one of my favorite pundits anyway. But, the whole concept of the resistance is to not make the mistake of normalizing what Trump is doing. This is not a normal negotiation over the budget. It's not a normal negotiation over health care. The Republican House, hasn't been normal for a decade. And Paul Ryan is no policy wonk, so stop pretending.
I think they're about ready on that one.
Yeah.
I don't know why. Yeah, well, good. I mean, I hope it starts to happen. I don't know what else to... Yeah, I'm trying to think about what people could have done with this other than writing these opinion pieces. I mean, I know that the regular beat reporters are baffled as to what to do. Hey, the president did appear here and say these things. Yeah,
and it's news, and therefore don't I have to cover it? Just like they try to defend, what they did with Clinton emails for day on day on day on day because isn't it news? Yes, but context matters. And you're supposed to supply context when you supply these things. There's nothing wrong with saying Trump said this, but it's not true.
Maybe in addition
Trump said
to
this, but here are the facts. Trump said this, but here's when he said the exact opposite 10 minutes ago. That's the way you do it.
In addition to having a public editor, or maybe these papers need some sort of context editor who's got the power to insert at least sidebar stories that explain, by the way, this is news for two reasons. One, the president did it, and two, this guy is speaking at the Holocaust Museum, and every 364 days out of the year, you're going to find that the anti-Semites are in control of his White House. But for political purposes, he showed up today to say, yeah, never again.
Right. Again, it's less the print media that is egregious about this. It's more cable. And cable's very effective when they have the little chyrons that say, Trump said X.
Oh, yes. That's
and then underneath it says, but he said the opposite 5 minutes ago. Or Trump denies that he did this, and then it says in parentheses, he did.
Yeah, they really have done well.
That works.
That's the perfect way to deal with their time restrictions that they operate under, and they're real.
Yeah.
Though, I suppose we could disrupt television and try and rebuild it from the ground up. But in the meantime, putting a little chyron underneath that says that this is complete bull would do the trick.
Mm-hmm.
I'm open to that. Anybody want to? Yeah,
I agree. I
okay.
think it should.
All right.
I'm sorry I agreed with Amanda today, but it happens now and again.
Well, we'll bring him in.
Even among the best
fill
of
in
friends.
the details of the things that you missed. He did begin complaining about the coverage of the Sanctuary City story until he heard you were going to leave it to him, and then he thought it was a great story.
I just wanted to have people get the background that, you know, if you're not a lawyer and you don't understand the details,
like Donald Trump,
what you do need to understand is that all the nonsense and all of the chest thumping and all of the bluster that the Trump administration does is going to be and has been used against them in a court of law.
Yes, and it's great. And ordinarily it wouldn't enter into it, but
it's so egregious you can't not.
Yeah, but I mean, this serves as legislative intent in the absence of there being actual legislation. If it's just an executive order,
well, we didn't mean that. Well, then why did you say there's 15 things that said you did?
Even today, when he was grousing about the judges that keep, for some unknown reason, blocking his agenda and saying it's
Isn't that what he said? He said,
I
don't understand how come every single one of these judges is named Curio. What is up with that?
But he did, once again, this morning in his rage tweeting, referred to his immigration policy as being a ban, which is what got him in trouble in the first place. The guy cannot help it.
Right. Well, you know, it's very hard to consistently keep a lie up. Eventually the truth comes out.
Yeah. All right. Well, it does keep happening, and there's a lot to digest about this sanctuary cities situation. And Trump reveals more clearly than ever that he doesn't understand any of how this works, including what is this whole thing. He has this big hang up of, how could one judge do that? What do we see a lot of movies with like 10, 15, 38 judges on the bench conferring about what to do? No. I mean, that's how many judges you get in a court case. Mm-hmm. Minus appeals, which nobody sees on television. I don't know. I'm not sure what he's talking about when it comes to that. And of course,
where's Henry Fonda when you need him to explain how the courts work?
I don't know. He's gone. But
he's gone.
I can't fathom how. Well, I can fathom. I know how he gets to be so out of touch. He just doesn't understand not only how the system mechanically works, but basically, as we found out, between this and the Muslim ban and everything else, including all the legislative efforts that are currently underway, essentially we're finding out Donald Trump is the ultimate answer to anybody who's ever said to you, if you ever had a discussion about how government works or what government ought to be doing. If they say, why doesn't somebody just XYZ, whatever. Why don't they just say, no. Well, the reason they don't just say that is because you very quickly, like 2-3 times inside of 100 days, get smacked in the head by high federal courts saying, I don't think you understand how this game works. You guys have lawyers. You should talk to them because they're the guys that understand this stuff. You can't just scribble on a piece of paper, like the Mickey Mouse drawings. I hereby say they should totally do this thing. And then that's not the end of it. There's a whole system of government that decides, does this make sense? Is it fair? Does it comport with the Constitution? And, those decisions are made by judges, and then you appeal, and like you appealed before, you lost. But that's never any impediment to him. I have an interesting story. If I get time today, in between all of my guests, I can tell you the story of the type of games that Trump plays in court when it's just about him, let alone about the country. And he's never understood it as an individual. He loses in court all the time. Mm. But it doesn't matter. He just doesn't pay anybody.
Well, that's the nice thing about your guests. You invite them on, and we don't let you talk. I think it's a great deal.
It's very good.
And with that, I'm not going to let you talk now. This is Greg Dworkin speaking to my friend David Wallman Kagro in the morning,
you can't leave.
Who I've been interrupting for more years than I can remember. And this is the end of my segment. So take care, and I will talk to you tomorrow.
All right.
We'll do it again.
Very good. We should.
All
right. We will. Thanks, Greg.
Yeah, but I do hope Armando will come on and explain the sanctuary city situation. It's really kind of interesting.
He may already be here.
You never know.
Okay.
Take care.
Very good. Thanks, Greg. He's not here yet, but the door is open, Armando. Now is your space in between Greg and Joan, although you're welcome to stick around for a while. How should I rate the overall quality of this call? I would say excellent. I'm going to take care of that business on the air. I'm sure Armando would like to get into the detail of the sanctuary city's ruling because there's a lot to it. And I've read a little bit about it. There's a lot out there, and I've read a little of it. So I'm hoping that He likewise has read a great deal about it, or rather, in contrast, has read a great deal about it. But a lot of it jumped out pretty quickly. And I assume we will very quickly move into the ultimate irony of all of this, which is that some of the court's recent and most conservative rulings are, in fact, what ended up dooming the sanctuary city's executive orders. I'm certain we'll get into that. Armando, anytime you are ready to go, we're ready to have you. Let's see. By the way, later on in the program, as Joan McCarter joins us, Congress being back in town, no doubt much on her mind, and we'll get some updates on the current status, if any, of healthcare, which I guess the new cottage industry is writing that the American Health Care Act is either a zombie or has been reanimated in some fashion and might be making its way back through Congress. And it's sort of like I say, a cottage industry for pundits, either to posit that or to say that it's ridiculous to say so. But clearly, there's some horse trading going on. It hasn't made the bill any better, and hasn't really increased its chances of passing ultimately. Though I guess it's a story in itself if you can increase the chance of its passing the House. Also, much under discussion, the tax plan, such as it is, and I guess we're supposed to see an unveiling today, and we have heard a few of the details about it. And Greg did mention that they're facing some difficulty with Senate procedure, and of course, when you're talking about passing something like tax reform under their what I guess is now becoming their preferred methodology. This is one of the problems with trying to force through both health care and tax reform sort of in the same time, but not in the right order. There was a method that they had in mind among the Republican conference both in the House and the Senate about what order they would approach things in, and I think that had to do with the use of reconciliation. But I don't think that they've fully grasped over at the Trump White House. I mean, that seems like a pretty safe statement to say they haven't fully grasped anything in particular. But I don't think that they've grasped that reconciliation isn't the magic potion of some kind that they have in unlimited quantities, that you just sprinkle it on a bill and you don't have to worry about the filibuster. You're limited in the scope, of course, which we know, and in your opportunities, the number of opportunities you have to fashion a reconciliation bill. And you can try to shoehorn as much as you want in under a reconciliation bill. But if you're gonna follow the traditional rules of reconciliation, it's going to become difficult. If you're going to fire the parliamentarian, I suppose you can get away with a lot more. But trying to cram, for instance, major tax reform into a reconciliation bill so that you can get it through the Senate with fewer than 60 votes creates a lot of problems if you're going to follow the rules. And here we're talking about rules that require that the proposed changes not create increases in the deficits particularly outside of the 10-year budgeting window that the Senate uses. This may ring a bell for you in general terms from thinking about the George W. Bush era tax cuts that they had to sunset after 10 years. You remember, and if you don't remember all of the background, you might remember, for instance, the battle over making the Bush tax cuts permanent. We heard that. That was a catchphrase that people in the news biz relied on an awful lot. And what it meant was that tax cuts originally passed using the reconciliation process, and in a rather controversial fashion at that. They had to remake the parliamentarian's office just to get that done. Plus, in the case at least of the 2003 round of tax cuts, resort to Dick Cheney as vice president casting a tie-breaking vote. Not only did they exempt themselves from the filibuster by using reconciliation, they barely got. They needed a tie-breaking vote just to get this stuff through, and pardon me, those tax cuts were designed to expire 10 years after their enactment, precisely because leaving them on the books any longer would have put them outside of the reconciliation permitted 10-year budgeting window. As it turns out, though, the notion, for instance, of lowering the corporate tax rates to 15% have enormous tax implications right away and for a long, long time because of the way businesses plan and pay their taxes. You can't simply say, for instance, well, we'll make it a 10-year tax cut, and in 10 years we'll get back to it, get back to renewing it and try and make it permanent, or at least try and renew it for another 10 years, and we can kick that can down the road for a decade, beyond the Trump presidency even. One of the problems with the way these things work, and therefore the way they're scored, is that a tax cut, even one that's capped at 5 years, has budgetary implications that increase the deficit far beyond the 10-year scoring window already. And I guess the word is that the experts say that really, basically, you might, maybe, possibly be able to get away with it and contain the long-term deficit impact of cutting the corporate tax rate to 15%, possibly if you limit it to 3 years of tax cuts and leave it at that and sunset it after that. They might have to that might not even make it. They might have to cut it down to 2 years, which would make it essentially worthless, certainly worthless as a planning mechanism, and essentially worthless to the business community, and a gigantic political liability to the political community as well, the Republicans. So we'll have to see how far they're willing to bend, stretch, break the rules, and to what end when we see them start to work on taxes. I have a feeling that we still have another media cycle or two to go through until we eventually find out that the tax proposal has collapsed into a disaster, the way that the healthcare one did. Although who knows, maybe in 2 weeks we'll be back pretending that one's got a chance too. All right, Armando now joins us to tell us a little bit more about the sanctuary cities ruling and how ridiculous the position that the Trump administration has put themselves in this time really is. Good morning, Armando.
Good morning, David. Long time no talk.
Yeah. I had a message yesterday. People were missing you. So there you go.
Hey, well, I'm back.
Yeah, sometimes you're busy.
Actually, I was away. I was out of the country for a few days.
They let you back.
But I'm back.
Did you have any concerns about getting back in?
You know, it's interesting. I was a little worried.
Oh,
but no, nothing untoward happened. So I can say at least my experience
all right,
under the Trump regime wasn't so bad. But to get to the sanctuary city story, there's I'll give you the hook. I mean, we'll talk about Trump's tweets just in the press release, just for the fun of it. What he said, the ruling was bad, and I'll get into detail why that's ridiculous.
Very bad.
And in fact, it's quite a conservative ruling, one that was driven by conservative case law. But before we get to that, I loved his judge shopping theory.
He heard
you know who the plaintiffs were in that case, right? It was the city of San Francisco and Santa Clara County.
Mm-hmm.
Those are in California.
Yes, so they shopped locally. That's good. I like that.
They shopped locally. Exactly. They bought organic local courts.
Yes.
And they're in the Northern District of California. And the Northern District of California, its court is in San Francisco, or one of its courts is in San Francisco.
Crazy. They should move it.
So, in terms of shopping, it's truly a ludicrous, almost bizarre attack. And I heard that he got that from Hannity, which wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. I guess that makes sense. It's a catchphrase that has some currency if people don't know what it is. It's like if you've got a case that can be brought anywhere in the country and you go looking for a plaintiff who is in a district where the judges are more favorable to your point of view, and you file the case there. Of course, for the plaintiff, it's not judge shopping; they're filing where they live. But
now, and look, who did judge shopping actually were the Republicans who, when they went after Obama's DACA and DAPA orders, they picked that Brownsville judge.
Yes, that's true too.
That was actually absolutely judge shopping. Now, you could have sued San Francisco and Santa Clara could have sued in Washington D.C. I think. They would have had venue there because they were challenging the Attorney General mostly, I believe. I forget who it was the United States of America, and of course the United States of America's government seat happens to be Washington D.C., as we all know. So you could have sued there, or you could have sued in San Francisco, but those were the two places you could have sued. And it's not surprising in my mind that San Francisco and Santa Clara would choose San Francisco. It's more convenient to them.
Yes, they saved money on travel.
Yeah, they saved money on travel. That was very frugal of them. So there you go. So that part of it's silly. Now let's get to the merits of the case. What was the case about? It was about the January 26th executive order saying that we're going to be really tough on sanctuary cities. Well, how are they going to be tough? They were going to threaten funding for sanctuary cities. Now, a lot of people have focused on the poorly written executive order. This was in the Miller-Bannon days. Remember, that was the first week. Miller and Bannon were writing all the executive orders, the travel ban. Yes. And it was, obviously ridiculously written. And one of the reasons it got struck down was because it was badly written, vague. For example, they don't even define what a sanctuary city is. What is, if I wanted to avoid being labeled a sanctuary city, what would I do?
Yeah.
I don't know.
You name your sanctuary city 2.0.
Yes. And of course the poor lawyers who had to go to court and argue said, well, we don't know yet. Which is okay. And of course, one of the things they argued and the judge cited was they said, well, this doesn't really change anything. This doesn't really have any real legal impact, Judge. You don't have to strike it down. It doesn't mean anything.
That was their which, by the way, was our theory about, for instance, the executive order about the enforcement of the Affordable Care Act
stuff. Absolutely.
And it's happened in a number of fronts. There's a number of such orders that the administration now, when it finds itself in trouble in court, says it doesn't do anything. Why are you suing me? I didn't change anything.
No, it was, and if someone sued on that, that's probably what they'd say. All I said was enforce the existing law. Okay. Right. Well, you didn't have to issue an executive order for that. You were supposed to be doing that if that's what you think the law says. So anyway, what happens is that its linchpin was a provision of the United States Code. If you want to look it up, it's 8 U.S.C. 1373. And I won't bore you with the actual words, but in fact, if you look at the plain language, it actually requires states and localities to cooperate with ICE, with the Immigration Service, with regard to two things: sharing information with ICE with regard to immigration status, which seems weird to me. I always thought that was one of the weird things, in that ICE would have all the immigration status information, not the local,
you send it to me, I'll
municipality. Share it with you. Dave?
Yes, I was just going to say, you ICE, send me your information so I can share it with you.
Send it back to you. I mean, I always thought that was weird. But what they really wanted was to say, look, I got a brown person here who I think might be illegal. Come check it out. Yeah. And indeed, there's something called the civil detainer, where if you held somebody and you had suspicions about his immigration status, ICE could request that you hold them. Now, the text of the law actually would require you to hold them, But that can't be interpreted that way. And this is where the case really, the whole notion of the merits of this case are kind of crazy, in that there were no merits for the government's position on this. The federal government, you may or may not know or remember, David would, but listeners might not, actually, because of a series of cases in the 1990s, can't order the states or a locality to enforce federal law. They cannot do that. That violated, according to the conservative court, it was a series of 5-4 decisions, Prince being one of the main ones, but it violates the sovereignty of the state. It violates the 10th Amendment and our federalism principles. Yes. So because of those series of cases, the reality is that the text of 8 U.S.C. 1373 is, in my view, plainly unconstitutional, because it actually does order states and localities to do things with regard to federal law. And I think that anybody could win a facial challenge to 8 U.S.C. 1373. The way they've gotten around that is they've interpreted 8 U.S.C. 1373 to be just requests from the federal government, but to have no actual enforcement power. And what Trump's executive order seemed to do was to make it mandatory that states do certain things to enforce federal law. And it added the twist of threatening federal funding if you don't comply with the requests of the federal government pursuant to 8 U.S.C. 1373. And the problem is what I just said, which is that this series of cases in the 1990s on federalism basically makes that wrong. I think that's the number one point that people should make on this when discussing this case, that the reality is that Trump came in with a dead loser of an argument. They had no argument. And that's why, frankly, I think they fell back on this doesn't do anything.
Yeah, I guess so. Because what were you going to say? Because if it did do something, then all these things would be wrong. Yeah. Well, the judge said, well, you can say it doesn't, but Trump says that it does. And Sessions says that it does. And by the way, this uncertainty creates a real injury for Santa Clara County and the city of San Francisco, because they have uncertainty with their budgets and are unsure how to formulate their own local policies on how to spend their money. So that, to me, was pretty much a slam dunk. But there were other flaws, believe it or not. And a lot of people are pointing to the Medicaid decision in the ACA case where Roberts said that conditioning Medicaid monies on complying with new requirements also was coercive and violates federalism. And this appears to do that because, as written and as threatened, it would go beyond what's called 1373 funding. 1373 funding, not surprisingly, is funding for 1373 activities, if there is such funding. That sounds
to wit, if I am going to have to gather information and share it with you, if I am, in theory, going to have to civilly detain people, or if I choose to, you're going to give me that money. So the threat is kind of stupid if it's just 1373 money, because I'm basically saying I don't want your 1373 money because I'm not going to do those things. So, okay, well, then I'm not going to give you the money. I said I didn't ask for the money because I'm not going to do those things.
Yes. Well, you should have.
Well, so obviously the way the threat was presented by Attorney General Sessions and President Trump was that, in fact, I'm threatening your other federal money. That was the only logical explanation for what this intended to do, and certainly what the threat and how it could be interpreted to threaten. So that interpretation did run smack into the Medicaid portion of the Affordable Care Act, because it doesn't even fit there. Because remember, the Medicaid money that was, quote, threatened, unquote, was in the ACA case was if you want to participate in Medicaid, because you get to decide every year, you at state of whatever, in this case, let's say state of California, whether I'm going to participate in Medicaid or not. And if I'm going to, I have to meet the federal conditions. And all the conditions that were imposed, the new ones by the Affordable Care Act, were related to, guess what, Medicaid. Here, the conditions were unrelated. So if I have money for police, to say, well, no, I guess police could arguably be. Let's stick to the hospital. Let's say it's the same Medicaid money.
Okay.
So let's say it's the same Medicaid money. That has nothing to do with immigration enforcement. So it's a completely unrelated string. And that's long been not accepted. Remember the Dole case, David, South Dakota v. Dole, where a lot of this came up? It was about lowering the drinking age, or rather, raising the drinking age to 21 if you wanted certain federal funds
going way
for
back
transportation.
Here. Yes. So national speed limit deal.
Oh, was it the speed limit one? Yeah, it was the speed limit. I was thinking of the drinking, but you're right. It was the speed limit. Lower it to 55 or I'm going to give you less money for federal funds. And the court upheld that condition, saying it was related to traffic safety. So, and
they
really
had to do both.
Yeah, and really the reality is Dole and the Medicaid decision are irreconcilable, even though Roberts didn't just go forward and say, I'm overruling Dole. So that argument is there as well. Finally, there was a pretty interesting spending clause argument in terms of separation of power. Now, under the spending clause, you should know that it's Congress that appropriates spending by the government, not the president. It is Congress who can put conditions on federal grants, not the president. Right?
Yes. Oh, and by the way, it was the drinking age which was central to Dole. Not I don't know why the speed limit came to mind, but I believe
there was probably a different law on speed limit, because I'm sure when they lowered it to 55, they probably did the same thing, based on Dole.
Yeah.
But no one actually challenged it after Dole, presumably. But the separation of powers argument says, listen, you don't get to, by executive order, impose legislative conditions on federal grants.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Also pretty clear and easy. These are not tough issues, right? I mean, it's not really debatable that Congress gets to appropriate the money and decide what conditions a state would have to meet, or a municipality or a county would have to meet in order to qualify for the funds. That is the province of the Congress. That cannot be considered a controversial position, I don't think.
It's not supposed to be. But you can consider, the president considers allowing a single judge that he doesn't like to make a decision to be controversial, but it's not supposed to be.
Right. So, there were other reasons that it was struck down. I've talked about the vagueness, and because the Bannon and Miller, they just don't know how to write things. So they wrote it badly, and it didn't really make particular sense, and there was, too much that was not defined. So all these things were frankly not remarkable, almost frankly pedestrian. And yet someone's going to talk about unelected judges. You know who established that the judges would be unelected?
I'm trying to think. There's probably a word for it.
Yes, the Constitution.
Right. That's the one.
The Constitution established that judges would be unelected. His problem apparently is with Article 3 of the Constitution.
Repeal Article 3.
Repeal Article 3 should be the battle cry.
And it always has been, to be honest. The last 10 years has kind of been like that. Someone did point out, I thought, astute observation, actually, on Twitter, that a lot of times particularly in red states, it happens to be the case that state judges are not exempt from that. They don't set their governments up the same way the federal Constitution established it. Their judges are elected.
Right.
And they think that's a great idea. And, it's an interesting experiment that they have, but I guess in some places there's less natural affinity for that, for lifetime appointments as a barrier to politicization and a measure for the preservation of the independent judiciary. They think that judges ought to be subject to voting, to the voters' approval every 4, 6, 8, whatever, 10 years. There's something to be said for that, but that's not the system we have, and blah, 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 something, something, founders, yada, yada.
Well, again, you want to make, I happen to think that electing judges is a terrible way of doing things, but maybe I'm wrong. I'll tell you what, convince the Congress, pass a constitutional amendment, get the necessary votes, take it to the states, get the recorders of the states to ratify it. Voila, you're done. You got what you wish.
Yeah, and
in the meantime, the Constitution says judges are unelected.
Right. Well,
they serve for their life upon good behavior.
Yes, during periods of good behavior.
During periods of good behavior.
Yes.
Whatever that's supposed to mean.
I don't know. Well, yeah, this has been pretty interesting, and it is rather amazing. And speaking of well put on Twitter, there was someone I don't know or follow, but who must have gotten retweeted into my timeline, who is according to his Twitter profile, Keegan, I guess Stefan or Stephen, I don't know how that's his first name, last name reverse. I think it's listed here like Keegan, it's Keegan, and the handle is just Keegan NYC. And his last name, I assume, is Stefan, Stephan, unless he's Stephan, which I doubt. But anyway, he's a verified account, so something la-di-da. Anyway, he identifies himself as a writer, organizer, and a law student, and he sees it right away, and he's just a law student. He's just working on it now, although maybe he's in that class now. He puts things pretty succinctly about the ironies of these conservative rulings prohibiting what Trump is after now. That it was as you mentioned, it was a Scalia ruling that he says held that the feds can't make state cops enforce federal gun control laws. And that was something that conservatives always used to cheer about, and that it was a Roberts decision in NFIB v. Sebelius that prohibits Trump's aim of withholding funding from sanctuary cities that don't comply. And so, as he puts it, pretty succinctly, and some conservative SCOTUS justices blocking gun control and Obamacare is why Trump can't punish sanctuary cities. Oops.
Yes, that's it.
Well, so he's done a good job. It's good that he has a background as a writer and organizer. He's written a very organized and succinct summary of the law as he's been studying it. And irony of ironies. Yargle bargle, gun control, Obamacare, stupid judges never. Well, you're right.
Let's look at that decision, because you can see that this isn't particularly difficult to realize. That he's talking about the Prince v. United States case of 1997. Scalia authored it. It says
PRINTZ, if you want to look it up.
Yes. The Brady Act interim provision commanding CLEOs, what that means is chief law enforcement officers of states and municipalities, to conduct background checks is unconstitutional.
Wah, wah.
Why is it unconstitutional?
Where's my trombone? Okay. I'll save the trombone for later. Why is it unconstitutional?
Because it violates the concept of dual sovereignty and federalism under the 10th Amendment.
Oh, no. The 10th Amendment, their favorite.
Here from the syllabus. Federal control of state officers would also have an effect upon the separation and equilibrium of powers between the three branches of federal government itself. The Brady Act effectively transfers the president's responsibility to administer the laws enacted by Congress to thousands of CLEOs in the 50 states, who are left to implement the program without meaningful presidential control.
That's right. And in the legalese, I have the ruling here as well.
Wrong, sir. Wrong. It's all there, black and white, clear as crystal. You get nothing. You lose. Good day, sir.
That's it. It's all over. I don't know why they didn't realize this. I don't know why they weren't familiar with this. I don't know. Didn't they ask Trump during the campaign, who's your favorite justice? Who would be your model for a nomination to fill this seat, which we've been holding open for a year?
Well, he was the guy that Obama murdered. Scalia.
I think Trump murdered him. I think it's pretty clear. He knew that they would hold it open.
So that he could now argue against Prince.
Yes, exactly.
Now Gorsuch would come in and say, Prince was wrong.
He has to. Because otherwise, they cut him. He's dead. Right? I assume that they murdered Scalia for his horrible, liberal, moonbat Prince decision.
Yeah, this is my favorite part of this quote. Just Prince again. Finally, and most conclusively, the court's jurisprudence makes clear that the federal government may not compel the states to enact or administer a federal regulatory program.
What outrage? Now, I was outraged. I don't know if I was outraged at the time.
I'll give the right-wing legal Twitter credit. They're not acting stupid on this when they realize they're saying, come on.
Yeah, well.
This is an easy case.
Yeah. I mean, and they're doing what they ought to be doing, which is like, reacting as they should and saying, Trump, you don't have people who get this, apparently. And it explains why. I mean, I guess if anyone was scratching their heads about why was the DOJ in court saying, well, our best foot forward, this doesn't mean anything. And the answer is because if you argue that it means anything, you look like an idiot. Because if it means what it says, you didn't study in law school.
Exactly. Again, as I started the segment on the merits here, this is not a hard case. This was plainly, what they were suggesting was plainly unconstitutional. Plainly. For 20 years, it's been unconstitutional.
And because it was likely written or formulated by Bannon and Miller and others like them who aren't lawyers, if you had said to them as a lawyer, well, here's the problem. This is open and shut. As a legal case, you're going to lose, and you're going to lose hard, and you're going to lose fast. And the reason is inherently conservative. It's going to be conservative cases that you cheered killing your executive order. And they probably answered, because they're not lawyers and because they're ideologues, who cares? Obama's executive orders were all illegal and unconstitutional. So ours will be too. But they weren't, because they passed muster in the courts. Yeah, but they shouldn't have. They only did because he nominated those judges. Well, actually, most of the judges who ruled on these things weren't his, because you prevented him from having his judges until the very end of his term. But that doesn't matter. The point is, they're court tested and lawyer tested, and they work, and yours won't. And you can't go back and say, but Obama was illegal. He wasn't even born in his country. He's a Muslim.
Okay.
That's not going to help.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's the most bizarre thing. But, of course, I'll end because I'm sure John's ready to go by now. And I want to give her space.
And she's free to come in and bump you at any time.
Ceding some of your time, John. The classic reaction, and I don't know if you saw this, was that this was a win for Trump.
Politically in the end, yes, I did see that Chris Cillizza, who's in love with Ivanka Trump, apparently, has decided that this is a huge gift to Trump, this ruling, because this will help Trump prove that these dumb judges don't know what they're talking about, much like my own DOJ lawyers.
Well, this is from his tweet. Judge Oreck just handed Donald Trump a much-needed political win.
Yes, huge win by defeat.
I guess Crystal Liza is, wait for it, tired of winning.
I guess that could be it. Maybe. And as a result, he's become disoriented and is identifying losses as wins. Ivanka may have whispered to him that it was a huge win. I don't know. But we did find out that yesterday that she's his big crush, I guess. She's the one he sees starbursts for, like Rich Lowry and Sarah Palin.
Oh, my God.
She's
the
the
whole
boss.
love of Ivanka thing was
She
weird.
is. Joan McCarter joining us, by the way. Hi, Joan.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, she's the boss.
Isn't
she? has
she?
been for Liza for months.
Yes. She's
I wasn't really aware of that until yesterday.
Oh,
I love
okay.
Parker Malloy's thing about what is it? Here it is. Saliza's just days away from scrawling Christopher Michael Saliza Trump, surrounded by hearts in a spiral notebook.
That's pretty much it. Boy, yeah, he fell for her pretty hard, and it's painful to watch, but I don't care about
It's very
Saliza.
painful to watch, and he persists. You would think
Nevertheless.
by now he would have been driven off of Twitter, but
Hey, he's cashing a big check at CNN now.
He's very
yeah,
yes.
that's true enough.
So he was very upset yesterday that Ivanka was booed or hissed or both by Germans. And
Germans.
Nothing Germans love more than being lectured by American colonists about how to conduct themselves in Germany when Ivanka Trump doesn't measure up to their chancellor and who's up there? The World Bank chiefs?
Yeah, head of the World
Bank. Oh, my
Bank.
goodness. Yeah. And also Ivanka Trump and her jewelry business were up there.
Yeah.
And
Just one last Ivanka thing, and then I'll turn it over because I'm eagerly trying to find out, and Joan will tell us, is the government going to shut down on the 29th? But the Ivanka, Ivanka told Axios that she is fundraising for her foundation for a program to empower women across the globe.
We should have done something about the troubles that fundraising for a foundation could cause for you. During the campaign, we had that opportunity, and nobody pointed it out. And
Yeah,
I'm
that issue
angry
never
about
came up once, did it?
No. Well,
I remember something about emails.
yes, but that's why Ivanka now has a government job and a secure phone. You won't be able to get her emails.
Yeah, what's your theory on that? So she can talk to her father? What's that?
Yes, I think she just took the job so that she could get the phone so she could text with Dad and not have him. I don't know whether she really wanted to offer advice. I'm sure she likes doing that. But I think she didn't want her dad to get in trouble because ordinarily he would probably text and or blab to her about national security issues. And if she was just a private citizen, that would cause him problems. But if she's a government employee with a top secret security clearance, a secure phone, and a White House job, it's all good. So he can call and say, the Japanese prime minister is terrible. I almost wanted to barf on him myself.
I hope he doesn't repeat the things he said about the Japanese translator to her, but you never know.
Yeah, he likes to
Oh,
share
I'm
things
sure
like
he
that.
does.
Yeah.
Oh, God. Anyway, so I'll sign off now and
Thank you.
Well, I
eagerly
had another
await.
legal
Whoa.
thing
All right, stay.
Okay.
Hang on.
that was kind of interesting that came up last week. Lawyers in various states talking about using the executive order Muslim ban business as sort of a template for them in fighting Obamacare cuts and the efforts that the Trump administration is making for Obamacare sabotage, saying they could sue based on the precedent that he is loudly proclaiming he intends to sabotage the law, that he is not going to uphold it. And does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it's not as good as straight line. Remember in the travel ban case, one of the issues was there animus based on ethnicity or race.
Right.
And as a general matter, in cases like that, you absolutely do get to look at evidence of motivation. Is the president's motivation to sabotage the Affordable Care Act on the same level? Probably not, but it would be relevant to the idea that he is not comporting with the purpose and provisions of the law. with it and said, listen, I would argue, I assume this is what they're thinking of, is clearly these executive orders do not comply with Affordable Care Act as written because the president himself says he's trying not to comply with it, I guess would be the argument. But
there is a constitutional provision, though, that says you're the president, you have to uphold the law as it exists, right?
Absolutely. And an executive order, this is actually somewhat related to what we were talking about, is what can the president act inconsistently with the law that the Congress wrote? No, it can't. No, he can't. He has to comply with the law. He's, in fact, as you say, mandated to make sure the law is put into effect. That was the argument, indeed, that was used in the Texas case against Obama on the DAPA case. They said that he was undermining the law by not enforcing it. The argument from the Obama side, I'm boring people now, I know, but let me just finish the thought, is that Obama said I had what's called prosecutorial discretion. And I can choose how I enforce the law to further serve the purposes. The Judge Hainan in Texas said, no, you're not making prosecutorial discretion decisions. You're undermining the law. You're not acting consistently with the law. And in some ways, I think that's more consistent with the argument that you presented here, which is the president seeking to undermine and not enforce the provisions of the law with his actions? I think that borrowing from Judge Hainan would actually be probably the better way to go than looking so much for use of those statements as opposed to looking for I guess it's similar. The motivation, why are you doing it? I'm trying to undermine the law and not follow it, and this is what I'm doing. So, I see some merit to it. It's not as clear a line as it is in the racial or ethnic animus context, because there's just a whole body of law on that in every context, employment discrimination, educational discrimination, any number of things where you really do look. These are the kind of things you look at to try to adduce motivation, and motivation is critical to those findings. One of the reasons why Trump has such a problem with the travel ban is precisely that. His motivation is clear cut. You can't just, and that's why they're actually trying to, and Kaczynski in the Ninth Circuit makes the ludicrous argument that, well, no, we don't look at what his motivation is. Of course you do. It's part of the law to look at his motivation. It's part of our well-established case law that why you did it matters. That's why Texas has voting restrictions. That's why you got to look at all the meetings and whatnot. And so, we're trying to keep black people from voting. Well, that's a very relevant fact to determining what your motivation was for passing these voter restrictions.
I was just going to say they ought to try and tie it into voter suppression cases as well, but between the Texas ones and the North Carolina voter restrictions, where they have, I guess that cuts against it a little bit because they ended up having explicit memos uncovered in North Carolina stating quite forthrightly what the motivation was. But it's a little bit more difficult to claim that his undermining of the Affordable Care Act has racial animus at its heart, but I suppose you could show statistically. Well, let's take a look. Just as with the voter suppressions, yes, it just so happens that we're writing race-neutral laws that happen to end up targeting almost exclusively African Americans. And just so happens I'm targeting the part of healthcare law that just happens to target the poorest among us and disproportionately African Americans.
It has disproportionately helped minorities.
Yeah.
People of color, not necessarily minorities in many of the states where it's helped.
Yeah, and I tell you, we don't talk about it enough, but one of the worst things about Gorsuch is we had a chance to reinvigorate our voting rights laws. With this fifth vote, we could have undone Shelby County particularly because the pre-clearance process of the Voting Rights Act was, frankly, at this stage of it all, the most critical part, because you could basically force every red Republican state who tried to do these things, including voter ID laws, to go through pre-clearance. And basically that would stop them because they knew, at least, particularly when there's a Democrat in the White House, that those things weren't going to get through.
Yeah.
Now, they could always sue the Justice Department and try to overturn it, but that's, a very difficult climb. But, don't get me mad about the freaking election again and these people, because then I'll start talking about the things I tweet about too much. So I'll stop there before I start yelling at people again.
That sounds admirable.
Okay.
You don't need to yell at us.
Not you guys.
Most of the time.
I've been having a running argument with Nathan Newman about socialists. And whether there are real socialists and what they think of the court. Again, I'll bore you. Nathan thinks judicial review is bad. And I think it's an interesting perspective. I think he's wrong on what the Constitution intended, and I think he's wrong on the policy, but Nathan argues in good faith. But a lot of the other rose-bearing Twitter accounts don't care about the court or voting rights and things like that. And it should their votes. But yes, I'm stopping now.
Rose? What does the rose mean?
Democratic Socialists of America.
Democratic Socialists everywhere. I don't know what made the rose the symbol. I don't know what makes anything the symbol of anything. I'm sure there's a story, but that's a International Socialist Party icon. When I was working for one of the a member of Parliament and member of the European Parliament as a socialist in England back in the late 80s. That was the big deal for the European Democratic Socialist parties. All had that rose motif. I'll look it up. But,
okay.
That's why they have it. I don't know, but that's their thing.
That's their thing.
It's cooler than a hammer and sickle.
And Nathan Newman tells me, don't judge us by a few bad apples. I'm saying, well, that barrel of apples was pretty big, but okay.
I'd like to look at another barrel.
All right, so tell me about the shutdown.
To your first question, I don't think we're going to see a shutdown.
I
don't think we are, but that depends a lot on the maniac in the White House. So, two of them, in fact. Mulvaney and Trump. So, it's
what
a new
would, what would trigger it?
It's a new one on me talking about the White House trying to get a government shutdown. But that's what happens when you have a Freedom Caucus guy as your budget director.
Yeah.
What could trigger it? It could be any number of things at this point. But it looks like they're ratcheting up the fight on, you guessed it, Obamacare and the cost-sharing reduction payments. In fact, Greg Sargent is just reporting now that Pelosi had a discussion with Mulvaney overnight, in which he said, nope, the administration is not going to make these payments next year, or next month rather. So whatever, Congress has to deal with it. They're not saying they'll veto a spending bill that has the cost sharing reduction in it, but it suddenly has become, again, a top issue.
You're saying this comes from the White House. There's money appropriated and available, and they won't pay it?
They won't pay it.
They can't do that. That actually goes back to your argument before. If Congress has appropriated and said, use this money.
Well, here's the rub on the cost reductions. A drafting error, and there were lots of these in the Affordable Care Act, didn't explicitly say this money goes to cost sharing reductions to the insurance companies, their payments to the insurance companies to cover the additional amount they've been subsidizing folks to reduce premiums. This is primarily for low-income people. So this is what the heart of the case Boehner brought all of those years ago against Obama was about. The Congress hadn't specifically appropriated. So they found a Judge Collier, a Bush appointee, who was willing to agree with the House.
Judge shopping.
judge shopping and say,
Comes up
yeah,
again.
okay, Congress didn't appropriate this, so really you can't be spending this money, but stayed the decision.
That was in the D.C., right?
Yeah.
Rosemary Collier?
Yeah.
I mean, she's not terrible. I remember that decision. It was pretty ludicrous.
Well, it was bizarre to me that a federal judge would indeed get in the middle of a procedural fight between the other two branches. That's what the Obama administration was primarily relying upon, was the idea that no, the judicial branch isn't going to come in and stomp on this one because they don't do that. They did that.
They won't do that except when they do.
Yeah. So now we're in this weird limbo.
All right,
where
so someone has to determine whether the law
declared unconstitutional, but that decision has not been enforced. The Trump administration has to figure out whether it wants to continue to defend the case. They haven't decided. Congress needs to figure out whether they do or don't want to continue to fund the subsidies. And right now they're sort of falling on the side of they do want to, because it would be kind of disastrous for them for 6 million people to lose their insurance now. And besides that, the Chamber of Commerce and the hospitals and the doctors and the insurance companies are all telling them, you gotta do this. So we're in a very sticky problem area right now that Mick Mulvaney doesn't give a what about.
Yeah, but let me ask you this, because I guess I have to read Greg, but I saw his tweet. Isn't this money that's already appropriated, though? I mean, it's one thing to argue about next year.
It's already appropriated, but not appropriated constitutionally for this purpose.
No, I get that there's a legal argument that Rosemary Collier has created, but she stayed her decision. As we sit here now, there's not like a court order saying you can't pay it.
No.
And as far as we know, Congress's appropriation is still considered valid, though it's all weird, because if they appropriated it, then what the heck are we talking about?
Where are we
whatever
at
they meant.
I think that there's money through June, if I remember correctly. So they've got the money for next month, but they want to see Congress putting money in now for beyond June.
I get that. I get that we're arguing about July. Let's say the argument's about what do we do in July. Okay, fine.
The money's there. Yeah. But the money's there now for next month.
Yeah, what you've just described, it seems to me, is something he cannot do. If the money's already appropriated for this purpose, the president can't just decide, I'm not going to give the money. Unless constitutional law has changed a lot in the last 10 minutes.
That's the original sequestration. The original sequestration, as Richard Nixon referred to it.
And I'm not even sure, at one point this was the threat that Trump was putting forward.
It was,
to try to force Democrats to come to the table to negotiate with him.
I thought it was about next year. And it seems like
he's been kind of given up on that. I think he's just saying, or Mulvaney is freelancing on this, which is entirely possible as well.
I gotta believe he's freelancing, because anybody checks this with I know there's a White House counsel, but so far he's 0 for a million in actually giving these people actual advice.
Yeah, he's heading down the same path here. Again, I wish this was illegal, or I wish I was right about this, so I'm going to sue, but I'm way off base.
I think July, I always thought, John, correct me if I'm wrong, the issue was the uncertainty for next year, and that the fear was insurance companies were going to drop out unless there was money appropriated, at least for the next few years. And they said, go ahead.
The companies participating in exchanges, this is a huge part of it. Seeing whether there is the recognition in Congress and in the White House that at least as long as the law has not been repealed and replaced, and the replacement is a big deal, there's uncertainty and they don't know what they're going to do. This is a huge part of it. It's not the totality of their concerns, but it's a very big part of it. And it's sort of the first thing coming up showing whether there's any goodwill toward the law, toward insurance companies, toward the process in Congress. So it's not the only issue for them, but it's the immediate one.
So they're saying, let's play this out, if I may. Trump says, not only am I not going to agree to funding through July, unless you agree by Friday on what I won't put in the CSR payment for next month. Is that, I guess,
release
what?
it, I guess.
They're not, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know, and I'm not sure that the White
I'm not
House...
sure Mulvaney knows. I mean, that's the whole
That
issue.
could be.
Well, yeah, I think it's primarily Mulvaney, and it's horrifying because he is one of the worst of the Freedom Caucus maniacs. And he still very much has that mindset.
He may just think it's possible. He may be right that there's I don't know what the mechanism would be. I'm sure Donald Trump just says, well, I just won't write the check. That's all. Like he's personally the guy that you don't actually write the checks, sir, that, you get to draw directly on the Treasury. It doesn't involve the president. What have I been signing all these things then? They're executive orders. I thought they were checks. That's what I'm usually signing. All right. They're very big, I noticed.
Oh, here's an understatement, says AHIP. It would be very alarming for insurers not to receive the CSRs. Yeah, I bet it would be.
Yeah, it would be. AHIP, the Hospital Association, the AMA, again, the Chamber of Commerce. New poll from Kaiser Family Foundation shows that 64% of all Americans, and it's 53% of Republicans, are going to blame Trump for any sabotage.
Maybe
if this happens, it's going to be on Trump and it's going to be on the Republicans, which is why, for their part, I don't think congressional Republicans are going to have too much of a problem working with Pelosi and Schumer to put this in the spending bill. It's just, what else are they going to try to put in? Are we going to see Planned Parenthood defunding again? It's the same dilemma that, forced Boehner out of the House, basically. How do you keep the crazies on board, enough of them, and get Democrats too, and not have the crazies revolt?
I guess what's weird about it, as I read Greg's story, is this negotiating ploy is, if you don't agree to eviscerate the Affordable Care Act for next year, I'll eviscerate it now.
Yeah.
So if I'm a Democrat, I'm not seeing why I would agree anyway. I mean, if you're going to eviscerate it, you're going to eviscerate it. 3 months isn't going to be the...
Now versus later.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, was that a healthcare story or was that a filibuster story? I can't tell the difference.
What about tax reform? Isn't that going to be passed on Friday
yeah,
too?
we're supposed to hear about that today. We're also supposed to hear about the new plan for net neutrality today. Today's going to be big. Yeah.
Also, the whole Senate is supposed to hear about our war with North Korea today.
Oh, yeah,
it's a big day.
I know what the plan for net neutrality is. There won't be net neutrality.
Right.
I don't need an announcement.
Well, that's their plan, rather.
No, we're not really sure on that.
Oh, okay. Actually, I feel pretty sure about that.
Does Ivanka want to keep it?
Personally.
Well, Pi apparently is going to say, okay, let's put and this makes a whole lot of sense, let's put the regulation of net neutrality and the big telecoms under the FTC's purview. Which I'm not sure you can do. I don't know that it's within the FTC's.
It has never been before.
Yeah.
Well,
but so he says Big Telecom is going to agree out of the goodness of their hearts to comply with an open internet idea.
Yeah, like I said, it's no more net neutrality. I mean, that's what that means.
Not much of a guarantee, true.
What some folks who are working on this issue believe he's doing is trying to give the House a shove on actually legislating it. And this is what the Senate apparently wants to have happen too. Thune's ready with his legislation to get it. statutorily. Okay. And they want to try to move the House to do it too. And they think that this is sort of a bargaining ploy on Pi's part to get the House to act. So we'll see.
All right.
What they do all know is that if they try to do anything to undermine it, is that they're just going to be swamped again with phone calls and with people harassing them every single day. So do they want to add all of that on top of all of the other phone calls they're getting all of the time, every day, tying up the phone lines? Do they want to do that on top of taking health insurance away from millions of people? Probably not.
No. Well, you would think not, but it's possible. I wonder if...
we lost Armando. He's off typing.
Oh, yes.
Sorry, I'm yelling at Matt Iglesias.
Matt Iglesias has done something reprehensible again? All right.
It's the stupid speech thing.
What?
He keeps pretending that these speeches have some political impact.
Which? Who?
Obama's Wall Street speech.
Oh, okay. Well,
and he keeps saying, well, now that you got, he says, my guess is Obama cares about the consequences of his actions, and he should see that this conduct by the Clintons hurt progressive causes. It did not. It does not. Nobody cares about it except Goo-Goos, which is fine. I think if you're against it for policy reasons, be against it. But don't pretend there's a political reason to be for this.
Well, the immediate. Well, should we even talk about this?
No, we shouldn't.
We should save it for another day. It should be talked about, but I don't know if that's where Joan wants to go with it necessarily. We do.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Joan, we owe you a show.
It's all right. It's more fun than talking about government shutdowns. Although I keep being shocked that it's actually the White House that is making all of the shutdown threats.
Yeah.
It's just insane to me that we've reached this point.
I am curious about that. I wonder whether somebody read the history of the previous government shutdowns and in recent years and read that as the blame always goes to Congress, so we'll be okay.
Yeah.
And maybe that they thought, but it's like, well,
again, I think a lot of it is that he's just let Mick Mulvaney loose.
Maybe. Because he doesn't understand this stuff, and Mulvaney says he does, so go for it.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about Trump's motivation?
Yeah.
Well, just that this is coming from the White House. It just doesn't.
It's coming from Mulvaney. It's not.
Yeah.
Trump.
Maybe right.
Trump is an idiot. Trump doesn't know his butt from his elbow.
We saw that yesterday with the whole, are they going to shut it down over border wall funding or not, when we had 3 different stories coming out of the White House in a matter of 4 hours. Yeah, he's given up on it in this bill. Kellyanne Conway reiterating that. Sean Spicer coming out and saying, nuh-uh.
Yeah.
Oh, spicy.
Most reports on the press operation is they're the last to know.
So, is that Trump not knowing what he wants and telling everybody a different thing?
Could be.
Is it Trump forgetting what he told the last guy and telling the next one something different? But
he just tells everybody.
Going forward, it does look like Spicy was wrong, and indeed, border wall funding's not going to be the thing that ties this up.
Okay.
Unless they change their minds again.
It's possible, I suppose. I mean, Rush Limbaugh's mad about it. I don't know whether he's driving any calls to Congress or not, but if not, then it's pretty short notice for him to be able to change it from the radio show without outside help. That's it seems like I've just seen too many stories saying, well, he'll back off of it for now and he'll come back and try again in the next budget go round in September. They keep saying September, but you won't see anything about the budget. September. And unless,
that's
in this budget.
There's something that we haven't seen yet, and September is the end date for the spending bill they're working on now.
Yeah. Well, September would be the end of the fiscal year anyway, and I guess what they mean is we'll come back and try and take the next year's appropriation, the beginning of the next fiscal year, hostage over the wall instead of doing it now.
Yeah.
Okay, so it won't change any of the content of the budget.
You know, they're probably also working on the assumption that the CSR goes to September when they have the budget ready, and then the next CR will go until a week before Christmas, so that they have that deadline, and that.
And then we're back into the same pattern. Okay, well, that's a possibility too. Yeah, nothing for all the things that are supposed to get fixed today. I am assuming that none of them will be answered by tonight, except they'll have the briefing for the entire Senate in the White House for whatever reason.
Well, and we do know, according to Pete Sessions, that they're not going to try to do zombie Trump care this week.
Oh,
we know that much.
Okay, I did not hear that one.
Yeah,
good. All right. Well,
Sessions says they'll take up the spending bill by Saturday, which is good of them, since
that's the time for it.
Friday midnight's the deadline, but there will be no healthcare vote on Friday.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good. That's I hadn't heard that they had resolved it. That's the only thing that makes any sense. And I guess we could technically get a shutdown. These shutdown things. There is a practice that they rely on every once in a while, where they finish work on, for instance, in this case, government shuts down midnight Friday. They'll do the work overnight and pass the bill Saturday morning, and the government will technically be shut down from Friday
but
midnight
nobody will notice.
To Saturday at 9 a.m. or something, or even 11 a.m.
Yeah.
They can carry that far. So we may see that again. That'll be fun. I don't think we've ever seen a government shutdown at the outset of a potential nuclear war, though. That's new.
That's new.
You're going to have to fight.
And in the
North
first
Korea.
100 days.
That's true, too. It's so rare in the first 100 days, and it's not a coincidence. It's because they usually come into office with a budget having been adopted by the previous administration and previous Congress that stretches into. That's why the fiscal year ends in September, October instead of December, so that you can have a government that continues in existence even during a transition period and not leave this on the lap of a brand new president who's also an idiot, if that should ever happen. But they managed to screw that up.
Yep.
Regardless.
They could just do a CR, though, and keep this going for a little while, right?
Yeah.
Or is that just completely off the table?
No.
They could, and they might like that because that gives you more opportunities to try to pretend you're a savvy negotiator and hold something hostage. Maybe they'll figure out that the next time that the things that they keep moving from one hostage to the next, and each one is less convincing as a hostage.
Next. Particularly when Democrats, laugh at each hostage.
Right. So this is not working out very well.
I foresee many, many CRs in our future.
I'm surprised they didn't roll it over to try to get it with their tax quote reform unquote stuff. And you say that's going to be revealed today, but you can't reveal a tax plan. I mean, the substance of an actual bill, you can't write those things in a day. I mean, there's a reason why they go through committees.
Tell Trump that.
Am I crazy?
No, you're not crazy, but this. You're speaking like somebody who understands how government works.
And I really don't, which is funny because, but I at least can speak it. And I see they have the markups, and I've got to do this, and there's horse trading,
and
that's also 20th century.
Oh, considering how long it took them to draft the Affordable Care Act, and that we're still in court over drafting errors.
Oh yeah. By the way, it's F. Max Baucus for the 18th millionth time.
Yep.
Well. Too late.
And Joe Lieberman.
Oh, well. Yeah. Always ripe there.
Always.
Okay. Well, that's a lot.
You guys are having a nice discussion, then here I come in. Oh, by the way,
this keeps it lively. There's really just not, I don't know. I mean, is there anything that we need to squeeze in before we finish, John? I mean, we still have 10 minutes here, but.
I do have a couple questions for Joan about what's happening in Congress.
All right.
I'll try.
At least it's for Joan.
Everything is budget and walls, and mostly because Donald Trump doesn't believe in anything and has no idea what he's doing.
Mm-hmm.
And this, in a strange way, is a good thing, because if he doesn't know what he's doing, he can't really formulate anything to do. But I'm worried about one thing that Trump mentioned. He's picking fights now with Canada. Watch out, Canada. We're going to invade British Columbia or something.
That armada's going to turn around.
54-41 our fight.
That's right. A 54-41. We want that one now. I knew what you were talking about. I'm impressed with myself for knowing. And I know Joan does. Was that 54-40? There's a Lewis and Clark angle on that, isn't there? Joan?
There is, yes.
I believe there is. The trade issue. And I don't know. Congress has a role in these things, but it comes later. But I know that Bernie said, well, he could work with them on trade, and that's fine. And I'm not criticizing Bernie for that, because I think they kind of agree on trade. I don't agree with either of them, but that's fine. If people disagree, it's not the end of the world. I do think that some of the things he talks about, now he has a right to renegotiate NAFTA, but he still has to come back to the Congress, I believe, to adopt any changes. Mm-hmm. Anything happening in any, I don't see, they used to have committees that
Is anybody doing anything? Not that I've seen.
I mean, there used to be committees in Congress that did stuff, and they'd send out press releases. We're proposing this, and we're working on that. Am I crazy, or am I just making that up? Wasn't there, committee on this and a committee on that?
Yes, in fact, there still are committees. Whether the committees, this is something Kagro and I've talked about a lot, about how Congress used to work, how Congress was designed to work, and how all of those norms are pretty much dead.
Yes, the centralization and nationalization of all political party agendas, it happened on the Democratic side in response to having done it on the Republican side.
Yeah.
Part of the Republican revolution that Newt Gingrich led was that everything was going to be nationalized, and if everything's nationalized, there's really no reason to let regional legislators get together behind closed doors somewhere and come up with a plan. That should be centrally dictated from the Politburo. The Republican National Committee or Newt's office or whatever it happens to be, in this case now Trump's office, policy is dictated, and maybe the details get worked out in committee. I don't know. They should definitely do this thing, and you should figure out how it gets done. It's up to you. That'll leave to you.
How they used to always say the Powerful Ways and Means Committee?
Mm-hmm.
That's not really true anymore, is it?
It's not as true. I mean, you still have to have the Ways and Means Committee to push through stuff, but the committee members don't have nearly as much power as they used to. It's now all in congressional leadership. They decide what moves, what gets put on the floor. They decide the legislation. You don't have the quaint idea of schoolhouse rock, where some constituent comes up with a great idea for a bill, gives it to their representative. They talk informally to people, write the legislation, go to their committee or their subcommittee. It gets worked through. Everybody happily considers it and debates it and rewrites it, and it goes to committee and it gets passed out of committee and goes to the floor. I mean, you saw it with Trump Care. It's a handful of guys with whomever putting this thing together. They say, okay, is it going to hit the floor on Wednesday? Maybe you get to see it, maybe you don't. The committee rubber stamps it. That's how it's done now. It's not the schoolhouse rock way anymore. So, yeah, is there a committee working on trade negotiations? Probably not.
There's a committee that has it under its jurisdiction.
Right.
It's just not a committee
and that
doing
will
anything.
Pass out the thing that leadership gives them to pass out. But it's developing anything.
You can't really kill things in committee anymore, right? I mean, it's like you have to kill it at the caucus level
before they get to the floor.
You got to kill it at the caucus level, the Freedom Caucus level.
Yeah,
that's true.
Speaking of zombie Trump Care, they're at it again.
Oh,
Today, today we've got the new amendment and supposedly we've got the Freedom Caucus behind it. And this is very fun. This is going to go over really well. It does include the thing that allows states to opt out of pre-existing condition protections.
Yes.
Except that congressional staff and members of Congress who still purchase through the state exchanges are waived. They can opt out of that if their state decides they don't want to keep those protections.
I'm wondering how that will work.
No matter what, Congress is going to have those protections.
Pretty good. So if you are a member of Congress from a state that says from now on our insurance companies can charge whatever they want as a premium if you have a pre-existing condition, except if you're a member of Congress or staffer for a member of Congress from our state, then you're protected from that premium increase?
Yep.
That's great.
Isn't that great? That's going to go over
idea.
Really well.
In town, sure. Yeah. Everyone gets to keep that is really good. That's almost exactly the model that Trump and Trump supporters ran against, that there were special protections and special freebies for members of Congress. So it's good. They want to preserve their talking point. That's all it is.
It's a wetland. It's not a swamp. It's a wetland, and it has to be protected.
Yeah. Oh, maybe that's it. Well,
yeah, we have to drill in those wetlands. Sorry.
That'll teach you environmentalists. Okay. Well, it is in fact you've done a terrific job making my job easy, everybody. It is about time to wrap up for the day on today's show. But this was a good way of handling it. I think in that Congress was just barely back, and they haven't actually accomplished anything yet. There's a tremendous amount on our plate because all of it is insane. Possibly a brand new healthcare, possibly a brand new tax bill, possibly a war with North Korea, possibly the end of net neutrality, all of which will be accomplished. Oh, and a government shutdown, all of which will be solved by Friday. It's called management, Joan. Look into it. So,
by the way, Paul Ryan's the most unpopular politician in the land.
Is he? Well, congratulations, Ron. Good job, Ron.
Well actually, Chris Christie may be less popular. They're not surveying him nationally.
Pound for pound, though, I challenge anybody to be less popular. It's fantastic. Well done, Ron. Chris, get me a burger. Thank you, everybody, for joining me today. It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Joan, for putting up with Armando. And Armando, thanks for helping carrying us through. I appreciate it.
Put up with me, too. I interrupted a lot.
That's the way it should be. That way it's fair and balanced, both sides. Okay. Thanks very much, guys. We'll wrap it up for the day. Of course, do stay tuned for the after show coming up next right here on Netroots Radio. I don't believe they'll be interrupted by anybody from the outside. They should be so lucky, I say. What's coming up on the show today? I will probably, anytime now, press the button that will reveal it to me. Let's see. Oh, as it happens, guess what? The after show is not coming up. So Joan, Armando, everybody come back on and we'll do another hour. That's not going to happen. But unfortunately, Wink has a bit of a scheduling conflict today. No after show. In its place, it is Justice with his appearance on this week's Tim Cormorall Show with Joe Marnis of the Poorly Written Political blog, Caitlin Chris from the Stephanie Miller Show, and Adam Abert of Indie
From
Media
Daily Co's
Weekly.
Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
With David Waldman.
How did I do in pronunciation there? Adam Abert, did I turn you into a Cajun, Adam, or is that incorrect? I don't know. I'm going with the Bobby Hebert pronunciation because football pretty much dictates my life, as you can tell from this fantastic sports show. Thanks very much for listening. We'll be back tomorrow with more. Stay tuned.